courts would be sympathetic to their interests or that fairness would be the issue.
2 years after the Dred Scott case, an abolitionist named John Brown organized a plot to free Southern slaves through armed intervention. In order to secure sufficient weaponry, he led a raiding party of 13 whites and 5 blacks into the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia.
John Brown contacted Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and involved them in his Harper's Ferry plan to attack the slave-owning South and to liberate the slaves. Harriet Tubman was committed to join Brown. Frederick Douglass, however, studied the plan and determined that it would fail and decided that he would not be a part. Harriet Tubman would have been with John Brown at Harper's Ferry had she not become ill at the time.
Brown wrested control of the armory, killed the town's mayor, and seized several hostages before he was captured by federal authorities and hanged 2 months later. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. He opposed the expansion of slavery, and his victory threw the South into revolt. By March of 1861, 7 states, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas, had seceded from the Union to form a coalition they called the Confederate States of America. The Civil War began 1 month later when Confederate gunfire sounded over the federal stronghold of Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Lincoln responded by issuing a call for 75,000 volunteers to man the Union Army.
Some historians argue that economic issues were of utmost importance in the causing of the war. Many historians, though, have come to the conclusion in recent years that slavery was the key issue which caused the Civil War. At the heart of the Civil War was the issue of whether or not the slave states were going to be able to maintain their status.
The abolitionists presented the president with 2 demands: the right of freed blacks to fight with the Union Army and the emancipation of the slaves.
The abolitionists were the men and women, black and white, that wanted to abolish or to end slavery. Many of the abolitionists were in the North, and they fought for many years to change the system that the country had accepted.
I'd like to add also that for women abolitionists, speaking in public was tremendously courageous. That the early 19th century was a time in which women did not generally speak in public. It was not considered the thing to do for respectable women.
Eventually, Lincoln acceded to both demands. Nearly 185,000 blacks fought valiantly during the Civil War, and about 38,000 of them gave their lives to the Union's cause. In December 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, abolishing slavery. The war's end in April 1865 brought freedom to nearly 4 million slaves. Freedmen, as both males and females were called, celebrated throughout the South on plantations or at crossroads between them.
By word of mouth, news of the Emancipation Proclamation spread, I believe, like wildfire throughout the Confederacy. The ability of African Americans to transmit messages before the Civil War, during the Civil War, is legendary, and this was another example of that legendary ability to communicate.
In December 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, guaranteeing the hard-won freedom of African slaves. It stated, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States." Emancipation throughout the South was followed by a period of intense confusion in which blacks made the dramatic transition from slavery to citizenship.
At first, a number of slaves decided to walk about, as the expression was in that time, to test freedom, to see what it really meant. But they soon discovered that life meant more than just having simple freedom without economic support. And so many were forced to go back to the old plantations and to contract with their owners for work.
In 1867, Congress, fed up with the pussyfooting of the president, who was then Andrew Johnson, a slaveholder from Tennessee, and a man who had been Lincoln's vice president and who ascended to the office with the assassination of President Lincoln, passed the first Reconstruction Act in March of that year. And that placed the 10 of the 11 states of the Confederacy, the Fighting South, under military rule in 5 districts, and annulled the governments of those states.
This Reconstruction ushered in an era of reform, but did not alter the economic disparity between the former slaves and their masters. The South complied with the dictates of Reconstruction only because the military now occupied their territory, enforcing the new laws. As part of this revolutionary pattern in the South, Congress extended the right to vote to all free men, thus granting formerly unheard of power to the blacks. This new block of black voters, without a corresponding economic foundation, only increased the ability of the Republican Party to maintain temporary control of the United States.
After the Reconstruction, government failed and the Northern soldiers were pulled out of the South. Violence increased in the South. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan were attempting to take away the rights that had been gained by African Americans.
One of the things that I think young people today should be aware of is the range of extremely important contributions that African Americans have made to American society over the years, and that they've been able to make these contributions in the face of overwhelming odds. They have fought for rights which had been denied them, and which we now have available to us, and which quite often, quite frequently, we abuse, we don't take full advantage of.
The Civil War destroyed the institution of slavery, but it did not end the racism of white Southerners who wanted their former slaves to retain their inferior status. Discrimination against Americans of African descent would continue. Like Tubman and Douglas before them, new leaders would be called forward by African Americans to guide their fight for freedom.